If you cast your minds back to just before all those headlines about Justin Roiland dropped, a common attempt at an explanation for why Rick and Morty's been going downhill is that the show relies too heavily on meta-humour. This activated the defensive bit of my brain because metafiction is a pet subject of mine, so I thought I'd put this video together to explain my thoughts on metafiction, because one thing that's often missed out in people's analysis of metafiction and meta-humour is the purpose that being meta serves. Lots of shows use metafiction to varying degrees, and its presence itself isn't inherently a problem. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is a key example of a show that's almost entirely woven out of subverting the codes and conventions of children's television for either shock value, comedy, or just generating discussion. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared doesn't get the same shit that Rick and Morty gets for being too meta. Cause hell, what does Rick and Morty do? It subverts the codes and conventions of standard sci-fi space adventures and sometimes breaks the fourth wall. Same thing Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared does with children's media. But why does one get shit for it and the other doesn't? Style is probably the answer that everyone's going to respond with, because yes, they are very different shows, but the argument doesn't go the show's style isn't good, the argument goes it's too meta, and I'm just really not on board with that explanation. Personally, I didn't stop watching Rick and Morty after season 4 because it was getting too meta. Hell, I thought one of the best episodes of season 4 was the one about the story train, and that was basically all metafiction. I stopped bothering with Rick and Morty for the same reason I stopped bothering with South Park back in about 2012. I'd seen one too many episodes that were reliant on one shock joke thinly spread across 20 minutes, I got bored and realised I'd pretty much just seen all I needed to see of it. Oh, so it's the human centipede but with iPads. Ew, gross. Oh, they're dragons, but they're like horny dragons. Right, okay, haha, what else you got? Okay, so what is metafiction? Well, it's quite a broad term that goes beyond just a character breaking the flow of the narrative and looking at the camera and saying, "Hello audience, this is what I'm thinking," a la Malcolm in the Middle or Fleabag, or indirectly commenting on the events in an almost but not quite fourth wall breaking way like Rick and Morty does all the time. There are quite a lot of metafictional tools in the creative's arsenal beyond a simple wall break. I recently read this book on the subject called Metafiction, The Theory and Practice of Self-Conscious Fiction by Patricia Waugh, in which she defines metafiction as writing which self-consciously draws attention to its status as an artifact in order to pose questions about the relationship between fiction and reality. The key point of focus there is the relationship between fiction and reality bit, because what we're really talking about when we say reality and fiction is the audience and creation. Because if you blur the lines between the audience and the creation, it invites the audience to involve itself in the text. If you draw attention to the codes and conventions of the genre you're working in that the audience will be familiar with and have a working cultural knowledge of, you can actively encourage them to engage in interpretation. This happens in shows like Kevin Can Fuck Himself, a personal favourite, where two entirely different formats are playing out side by side. In one scene, it's a multi-camera network sitcom about a schlubby, self-important man-child called Kevin and his submissive wife Allison. But when Allison walks off screen, we follow her, and it becomes a gritty and realistic drama about a woman trapped in an awful marriage. Kevin Can Fuck Himself doesn't directly break the fourth wall, but it is distinctly meta, because by presenting itself as two entirely different formats, it sends the signal to the viewer that you should be watching this trying to figure out why this scene is in this format and why this scene is in a different one. Some characters only exist in the multi-camera, some can cross between those two worlds. Why is that? What is the show trying to say about these characters and the conventions of the sitcom genre by allowing them to do that? Those are questions the show wants you to ask and answer. It's not telling you what the point of it is, it wants you to figure out how this adds depth and texture to the characters of Allison and Kevin, and it does lend the audience credence to their own interpretation. If they don't tell you what you're supposed to make of these images, then what you personally make of them becomes an important component of the text itself. It makes it into almost an interactive experience. In realistic fiction, the voice of the author is the dominant one. It's unquestionable. This is the story. You will take it as I dictate it, and my intent is the interpretation that you must submit to. But by creating an informal piece that breaks the fictional reality by use of metafiction and meta-humour, and is to a certain degree aware of the fact that it is a creative piece, what you've done is you've undermined that authoritative narrative voice, and the reason for doing that is to invite discussion. If the author's world can be questioned by the text itself, then it can be questioned by you as well. So it's essentially giving you not just the permission, but incentive to talk about it. And let's be honest here, That's all any TV show, movie, book series or video game wants. Word of mouth is how things get popular. If you send meta signals to the viewer that break the barrier between the real world and the work of fiction, then you actively invite engagement. Engagement leads to conversation. The more conversations occur, the more likely it is that you draw in new viewers and your influence spreads from there. For example, I'm currently rewatching the entirety of The Simpsons for a series of videos on it. I'm watching the golden years at the moment, and it makes meta jokes, pokes fun of itself and undermines its reality in the same way Rick and Morty does on a pretty frequent basis, even in this early stage of the show's lifetime.
If you start building a balloon for every flash-in-the-pan cartoon character, you'll turn the parade into a farce.
Yeah, flash in the pan. The Simpsons. Yeah, that aged poorly, didn't it? And while I'm on jokes like this, I personally like it when shows lampshade themselves. Shows making fun of themselves make it human to me. It makes it feel like the show's on your level. And it makes sense for The Simpsons to do it, given they're meant to be an average, relatable, down-to-earth family. Take a look at this joke here from Dancing Homer from Season 2.
A Simpson on a t-shirt. I never thought I'd see the day.
This isn't a fourth wall break, but it might as well be. Because as said, the point of The Simpsons was to be a portrayal of a down-to-earth realistic family. But now, in the real world, because of the show, they're on t-shirts and have their own merchandise. And in this episode, in the fictional world of the story, Homer is now appearing on t-shirts because he's become famous. This joke is a direct comment on the paradox of the TV family designed to be down-to-earth and relatable that's also now incredibly famous worldwide. And the show didn't tell me that that was the motivation behind this joke. It's a clever nod to the viewer. That nod caused me to make that observation, and now I'm sitting here feeling smug and clever for noticing the way that joke commented on the reality of The Simpsons' success within the text itself. And that grants me social currency when discussing it, like in this video for example. Look at how massive my brain is, everybody. I am a smart man. I notice things. That's the point of metafiction and metahumour. It makes the audience feel as though their perspective on the work matters and is interesting. And it just works because people want to be listened to. They want to feel like their opinions matter, and metafiction tells you that yes, it does.
Hey, you guys are hanging on my every word. I become the center of attention.
The author's intent behind the work isn't this unquestionable singular reading of the work anymore. Your opinion matters too. The best touch for metafiction is delicate though, and it demands a deft use of visuals. Let's look at Too Many Cooks for example, one of Adult Swim's most famous viral hits. Too Many Cooks takes the form of an intro sequence for a saccharine 80s family sitcom that refuses to end. You think it's going to finish at about the 30-second mark after introducing a small handful of characters, but then it just keeps going, and it keeps adding more and more characters. And then you realise, oh, I get it, there's too many cooks.
Too many cooks. Too many cooks. Too many cooks.
But as the intro continues for a solid 10 minutes, it spans multiple genres and formats. There is so much to decode in Too Many Cooks. The imagery is cluttered with so many references that invite the audience to harness their cultural knowledge and have an actively engaging experience. But it's not just the references that are the point, it's the way it's arranged its influences that makes it so interesting. An antagonist shows up throughout the intro sequence and starts killing characters off, and he takes advantage of the convention that in an 80s sitcom intro sequence, characters stop, freeze in place, and look at the camera while their name pops up. But the killer isn't affected by this convention, and so he uses that moment where the character is frozen to strike. The killer is a character that's not meant to be there, as is signalled by the fact his name glitches out and refuses to appear in the credits. The show presented in Too Many Cooks is broken, and it tells you it's broken through its clever imagery and activates the bit of your brain that wants to understand why it's broken, and so you keep watching and are more actively engaged in what you're watching. This technique is employed in so many different types of shows. Twin Peaks is a prime example of a show that uses metafiction. It presents itself as a murder mystery, but clues as to who Laura Palmer's killer is don't necessarily have to be fed to the viewer through realistic means. Sometimes they are, but other times it can just be a case where a strange character shows up and they can just know things somehow. Like a mysterious figure appears in a vision and just tells Agent Cooper that there is another murder happening.
It is happening again.
The weird anomalous people from the other place are almost like creator surrogates moving the internal parts of the story around into places that they need to be. But because it's mysterious and veiled, that induces a feeling of awe in the audience. The editorial hand is present in Twin Peaks' narrative in its more mysterious coded imagery, and it's essentially beckoning you into the text, inviting you to put the more obtuse pieces of it together yourself. That's why people got so invested and why to this day there's so much fan-generated discussion out there about the meaning of Twin Peaks' more mysterious imagery. Because it hasn't told you what it means, but it's directly invited you to interpret it by blurring the line between fiction and reality. And the meaning of it all is hotly contested, and that's an inbuilt feature of fiction that is conscious of the audience's relationship with the text. It seeks to divide the audience, and the more divided the audience are as to a text's meaning, the longer the conversation about that text goes on, and the longer the conversation goes on, the more people get suckered into that conversation and become invested in the fictional property. And here's the thing about inviting discussion. Once you've sent your signals to the audience that invite them to debate and interpret the text, it allows you to start playing mind games with them. Don't Hug Me I'm Scared is a perfect example of this. Don't Hug Me I'm Scared built its reputation off the back of its cryptic atmosphere, and by sending meta signals that invite you to decode its images and figure out what it's trying to say, people started talking about it incredibly often. Viral videos along the lines of "Don't Hug Me I'm Scared Explained" started appearing all the time as the first videos gained traction on the internet, which were certainly a factor in its success, and the creators were very much aware of that. The more conversations are had, the more people want to get involved in them, the more people watch Don't Hug Me I'm Scared. As a survival mechanism for a property, Don't Hug Me I'm Scared proves how valuable metafiction can be. They created this special bond with the property for the audience, and in some cases of fan bonds people can take that too far and feel a sense of ownership over it, but clever usage of metafiction also allows you to reinforce your ownership as well. In the 6th episode of Don't Hug Me I'm Scared, a mysterious figure at the top of the house gives Yellow Guy a book that looks like it's going to be important and something for people to make videos about, but because our characters are simple, childlike, and can't understand that the book might be important, they shred the book and laugh about it. This ending reinforces the fact that creators are ultimately the ones in charge of the work, and they can hook and tease you, but then smash you in the face with the cold hard reality that something that looks incredibly meaningful to you can be treated as meaningless by the text. It is aware of the viewer when it does this. It knows you're going to see this book as important, and so it's essentially playing a practical joke on the viewer. I guess what I'm trying to say is that metafiction is a trick. By informalising the text, it makes the audience feel like they're involved in it and that their view on the text matters, and it tacitly appears to grant them ownership of that text. But what you're actually doing is pulling certain levers inside the audience's heads that engineers the conversations about the text's meaning to occur, and when they do, more people pay attention to that text. You may feel this approach is cynical, but meta signals are a valid tactic to engineer audience discussion, and you can't deny it works. Especially in the cases of things like Don't Hug Me I'm Scared and Too Many Cooks. Hell, it works for Rick and Morty as well. Look at the conversation that we're having now. Metafiction can also be used to create affecting emotional drama. Take a look at this scene from The Truman Show, one of the most meta films ever made, about a guy whose entire life is a television show. Truman's starting to discover that his entire world is a TV show, and his wife stops the action to do a commercial while Truman's having an emotional breakdown.
Why don't you let me fix you some of this new Mococo drink? All natural cocoa beans from the upper slopes of Mountain Nicaragua, no artificial sweeteners.
Who are you talking to? What the hell does this have to do with anything? Tell me what's happening!
This scene is so effective because it comments on the unreality of product placement and commercials where characters will just randomly start talking about the product they're selling in the middle of the action. And playing this as a joke causes the viewer to laugh and feel at ease. But this joke then directly leads into Truman's wife leaving him.
How can anyone expect me to carry on under these conditions?
The use of ease before introducing that serious drama makes it so much more powerful. That's the key to metafiction's most effective usage, the specific tactics you employ and the subtlety you use when seeding moments like this. All of this is why I love metafiction so much. It actively enhances the experience of engaging in a piece of media for me. It essentially makes watching a movie or a TV show into a game I'm playing with the creator. I think people trying to latch onto metafiction being a net negative in cases like Rick and Morty are reaching for the wrong stick to beat it with. I'm just unsure what people mean when they say it's too meta. Cause is The Truman Show too meta? Is Don't Hug Me I'm Scared too meta? Hell, is the golden years of The Simpsons too meta? Cause as I said, I'm watching through it right now and it makes meta jokes just as frequently as Rick and Morty.
It seems like every week something odd happens to The Simpsons. My advice is to ride it out, and by next week we'll be back to where we started from, ready for another wacky adventure.
In fact, I've now watched seasons 5 and 6 of Rick and Morty, and while I was underwhelmed by most of it, that feeling really didn't have anything to do with the meta elements. The finale of season 5, where they do Rick and Morty meet evil Morty, does the same reassertion of dominance over your audience that the finale of Don't Hug Me I'm Scared does. Side-eyeing the audience who've been hyping themselves up over the lore. Maybe it is just my love of metafiction talking, but personally I wasn't underwhelmed by seasons 5 and 6 because the show's approach to metafiction has either changed or degraded over time, or eaten the entire show. No, I was underwhelmed more because it's just generally hard to stay fresh over half a decade later, and when you're out of ideas, that's when you get to giant carnivorous sperm. I'm just over the show really, and I'm kinda just ready for it to end now.